Hello and welcome to the Oxygen Addict podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors, Precision Fuel and Hydration.com. You can personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so you can perform at your best with 15% off your first order of electrolytes and carbohydrate fuel with the code OA23, Precision Fuel and Hydration.com. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby, and I'm joined, as always, by Coach Chris Palfreyman. Chris, how are you doing today?
Hello, Rob. Hello, everyone. Very well, thank you.
Good. So we're bringing you another episode of the podcast to try and help motivate and inspire you. But two things you can do for us before we get started today, please. If you do like the episode and it's helpful to you, it'd be really, really appreciated by us if you click like and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching there, or click follow on your podcast app. That just helps the show appear in front of more people and hopefully helps get the message out to more triathletes just like you. And if you're looking for help and advice with your training, please get in touch. You can email us at help@oxygenaddict.com, or there's a link in the show notes. You can click through to our calendar and we can help talk to you to see if you'd be a good fit for being coached by us. And this episode in particular is one in which it isn't like a shameless plug for coaching, but very recently we've had Ironman UK here in the UK as we're recording this. It was a war of attrition this year, Chris, wasn't it, at Ironman UK? It was a combination of an extremely tough course. Some would say one of the toughest in the world, definitely in terms of rough road surfaces and the amount of steep, difficult climbs people face. Weather was really hard this year as well, really strong winds making it incredibly difficult. And I think from memory that the DNF rate was something like 35% of the people who started, which is absurdly high. Really, really, really sad. And we would like to help people achieve a lot less DNF rate than happened at Ironman UK. Amongst the athletes that raced that we coached, we had over a 90% completion rate. And the athlete that didn't finish got really sick, unfortunately, for race day, and possibly shouldn't have started, but gave it a go anyway. In terms of the things athletes can do to minimize the risk of a DNF, there's so much we can talk about. And we heard so many difficult stories, so many emails afterwards from people who said, I DNF'd and I don't know why. And I think we know why, unfortunately, in a lot of cases. So we're going to go through some of this stuff today. Firstly, if it's you that's listening and you didn't finish Bolton, or you haven't finished one of your Ironmans, it's really understandable that you're going to be sad, you're going to be upset, you're going to be annoyed. There's certainly a lot of people emailed to say, I was really annoyed that I just missed the bike cutoff and I wasn't allowed to start the marathon. There's a certain element of this that is non-negotiable. The race organizers, if they tell you that the cutoff is going to be at a certain time, don't be surprised if the cutoff is at that time. That's it. That's the rule. If you're 3 seconds over the cutoff, you're not going to be allowed to start the run, unfortunately. But hopefully we, Chris, can help people with the preparation side of things that mean people are going to be nowhere near those cutoff times, right?
Totally. And it goes back to the old adage of preparing to fail is, well, what is it? Failing to prepare is preparing to fail.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a silly sentence, but it does actually make a lot of sense when you get to endurance sports, especially Ironman. And, Ironman 70.3 and full distance Ironman has massively boomed over the years with participation rates going through the roof, much like running a marathon did 10 or 15 years ago. And it's suddenly turned into this event where everyone thinks that everyone can finish. And that is true to a certain degree. But
maybe it's not, right? That's the thing.
It's not.
Maybe it's not. Yeah. And that's the thing that people struggle with, I think, in that you watch the London Marathon and there are tens of thousands of people in fancy dress finishing in, I don't know, I think you can pretty much keep going all night at the London Marathon, can't you? And people in diving suits finishing it. The very rigid cutoffs and the nature of Ironman and events like that mean actually the harsh truth of this is that not everybody can finish, and certainly not if you're not prepared properly for it. And that's something I think that we've seen a lot of in emails that have come in from people. We've read the things that they've said and we've gone, oh, wow. Or like, I feel bad for you on a human level that you didn't finish, but I'm not surprised to hear that you didn't finish given what you've told me about your preparation. And that's something that people can definitely avoid, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I think what we want in terms of this podcast is we want to encourage everyone that's got that fire within themselves to throw themselves into a long distance, whether it's 70.3 or full Ironman. We're encouraging you to do so, but there's nuance to it. We're encouraging you to prepare to do so, which is very different to just signing up. And many of these events we sign up 6 to 12 months out of it, and within that period a lot of things can change within our lifestyles, whether it's family stuff at home or work conditions and traveling to the office, all that kind of stuff. And I think when we press buy to a 70.3 or an Ironman, we have to commit. We have to commit to a process of not just being, physically fit, but mentally we have to be ready to get up when it's dark, when everyone else is asleep, or the opposite, go to bed a little bit later than everyone else, and meal preps, all these things that month after month after month we have to do. And I feel that maybe there's a little bit of a trend going on where everyone kind of knows someone that did an Ironman with very little training, and they got, massive praise for it. And, good for them. But we don't want our athletes that are listening to this to be falling into that trap. If you sign up to something, let's make sure you do it to the best of your ability. And let's make sure you're prepared and have the most awesome experience and not putting your health at risk. And, we want to avoid these long-term injuries. So yeah, I'm encouraging anyone to have a go that has that desire, but I'm encouraging you even more so to reach out, to get a proper plan, to tick all the boxes when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to rest, when it comes to pacing, equipment. There's so much that can go wrong. Yeah. There's also a lot that can go right, but there's so much that can go wrong that it's difficult to hear these DNF stories as a coach, because that there's no reason why everyone, these 35% of people DNF'd at Ironman UK. We want to help you. We want to help you get to that finish line.
I think the thing you said there that's rang truest with me is the idea that the event isn't just about the event. Race day is the 1% of it. You're signing up to or at least people that are like us are signing up to commit to do something to change their lives, that they're on a daily process of committing to doing something that's going to make their life more positive. It's going to make them more healthy. The training is going to make them much fitter. I just don't understand the mindset of the person who shows up and says, I haven't trained for this. I'm going to do it without training and prove it's possible to, that whole thing. Not interested in that. I'm interested in people preparing for this thing, because it's going to be the hardest thing people have ever done if they are properly trained for it. If they're not properly trained for it, it's really, really difficult. And I had an email from someone who said, I DNF'd. I wasn't much outside the cutoff. I realized now that I hadn't done enough training on the bike. My longest ride was something like 50 miles in training. And what I don't want this to be, our show isn't all about signing up for coaching. It isn't us going, hey, you should come and join Team Oxygen Addict and sign up for coaching. We give away all this information for free. And I think if people go back through last year's archives, there's about 10 Ironman training series podcasts where people can basically build their own plan and follow the advice. And this guy actually said, I listened to a lot of your podcasts and I just didn't do the training. Guess what? You're probably not going to get round, or you're almost certainly not going to get round if your longest ride has been 50 miles and race day is 112 miles, and it's 112 of the hilliest, hard headwind miles. It really shouldn't be any surprise to anybody that they don't get the result that they were hoping for. And I understand that there are sometimes reasons why people can't commit to the training that they hope that they could do. But I think we've laid out a pretty good groundwork here for people to say, look, this is what you need to do if you hope to get through this. And if you've got to race day and all you've managed to do is a couple of swims in the pool and you've never been in open water and you've only done a 50-mile ride and you've never run, well, maybe defer to next year. Maybe look at that and go, this is going to be 500 quid down the pan. That's a really expensive swim or a really expensive sporty for somebody, isn't it? So anyway, we've got a ton of talking points to go through to help people avoid that DNF next time. Before we go into today's show, though, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Precision Fuel and Hydration. You can head over to their website and you can use their free fuel and hydration planning tool and receive a personalized strategy for your next race. So for those of you who really struggled at Ironman with either hydration or electrolytes or fueling, this is the first place to go to. It's totally free, and it'll help you understand your own carbohydrate, electrolyte, and fluid needs so that you can refine it during training. And that's the important part. If you're going in the week before race day and you've never thought about it before, it's arguably too late. Get in there and start experimenting and training and learn how much fluid and calories your body can absorb in training, and then you can make a plan for race day. You can even book a free one-to-one video consultation with PFNH's athlete support team, and they'll help you nail your race nutrition plan. So there's tons of free information there from PFNH. And I'd like to remember, if it's your first order, use the code OA23 for 15% off your first order. So I know tons of our athletes have loved using their products and used them successfully. And like anything, make sure you practice in training so you know that you can stomach it there in training. Right. So with that, Chris, let's jump into the meat of our discussion today. So the first talking point I've got here about avoiding a DNF is, as you've already said, it's proper preparation for the race. We'll talk about this physically first. And I think the first place to start with this is to say to people, here are the key workouts that you need to have completed before a race if you're to feel comfortable and confident going into an Ironman. In terms of the swim, I think you need to be able to swim the distance in open water and have done that a couple of times before race day. So a 3.8 or a 4K swim in open water ticked off. I talked to a guy from Belgium the day before the race when we went down to help out athletes then, and he was looking at, honestly, Chris, it was 40 knots from the west blowing across Pennington Flash, 2 to 3 feet of rolling chop coming across. There were squalls blowing in. It looked intimidating. It was like the sea. And he said to me, I've never swum in anything like this. I've never seen open water. Do you think they'll cancel the swim if it looks like this? And I had to say to him, well, I don't think so. I think it'll still go ahead. Do yourself the favor, get yourself to the point where you've done that swim in training. And also, we'll come to talk about this later on with the weather. I think it can be really hard if you've got a choice of what day to train. It can be really hard to pick the worst day to go and swim or the worst day to go and ride. But if it's bad like that on race day and you've never trained in those conditions, guess what? It's going to be even more challenging. So 4K open water swim.
I'm going to add one little nugget of advice on top of this. If you've signed up to a race that has you doing the swim element in the sea, guess what? We want you to swim in the sea. There's no point doing all your swims in the pool and then the odd swim in a lake. A lake is very different to the sea, and the sea is very different to a lake, which is also different to a body of water with currents such as a river. So keep that in mind. If you're swimming in a river on race day, get yourself to a river in a practice. It can only be, you can do that once or twice a year, and that's enough to put you through the process. If you're struggling to get to the sea, let's say, on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But please don't be that athlete on the shore on race day thinking I've never swum in the sea properly in my wetsuit. And
yeah,
it's just the anxiety that's going to give you. It's not healthy for anyone. So do yourself a favor and swim in the conditions and in the body of water that you're going to be swimming in on race day, please.
Yeah. And it can be super useful for people who are lining up to do, say, Ironman Wales later in the season. Open water swim, often really choppy, often the surf rolling into that beach. Find a way to get yourself either to Tenby and do an open water swim as part of an event there, or a hosted open water swim, or get to the sea and do a hosted open water swim in rougher conditions than you currently feel comfortable in, and get used to doing that. It's a really good point, Chris. So the 4K open water swim in conditions you're likely to face. Next up, the next marker is to be able to do a 6-hour bike ride, or ideally a 180K bike ride. For those of you who have never ridden 180K, if you can get multiple 6-hour rides done in training, great. But even better is knowing that you've got that 180K under your belt. And so for slower athletes, the Ironman UK course is an 8-hour bike ride for probably, I'm going to say, a quarter of the field, and it might even be half the field. It's an 8-hour ride. We need to prepare for that. Guys who've done multiple before, you can do 8 hours off a 6-hour ride, but if it's your first time, you need to have that in the bag. So either 6 hours or 180K and a 3-hour run. I think you need to be able to do 3 hours, or at least 2:45 in the case of athletes who've done multiple, as a 9:1 run walk, have those ticked off in your head, and then you know that you are in the physical fitness shape to be able to finish your Ironman. If you're miles off those, I really believe you'd be better off thinking about deferring your event and training again for another time when you will be able to get that done. I really believe that that's the case.
Spot on. I'm going to add a couple of little points. One, just to make sure that the listener doesn't get confused, we're not looking for you to do this in one day. You know, we're talking about the event distance for swim, bike and run, but on separate days and in separate phases of the training plan. So please don't be tempted to go and do 4K swim, 6-hour bike and a long run off it. That's not what we're looking for at this stage. We're looking at individual race day practices. So don't be looking to do it all in one go. Secondly, a point on the 6-hour 180K bike. This, to me, it's my favorite part of long distance triathlon. You know, that 6 hours on a bike is absolutely golden. And when you get to the point of knowing that you can absolutely do that, doesn't matter if it's windy, doesn't matter if it's raining, doesn't matter if you don't know the route, having that confidence and comfort on the bike, knowing how to manage your watts, your heart rate, your nutrition, it's an amazing feeling knowing that you're just setting up a great marathon. What I would say is very similar to what we said with open water swimming. Please don't just do this indoors. Please don't just do it on Zwift. 180K on Zwift. I know that's hard. I've done it myself many times, but doing it outdoors is far more relevant. And don't just pick what's hardest. If you think that doing, 6 hours on an indoor trainer is hard, that's okay. There's a time and a place for that. But in terms of preparing yourself properly for the demands of the event you're doing, you're going to be looking for a course that's similar. So if it's a very hilly course, go and find hills. If it's a very flat course, that also has challenges within itself. So please go and find a flat course. Please go outside and do it. And pick a day of the year. It doesn't really matter if it's wind, hail, as long as it's safe to a certain degree, please go and do it on that day. I had another point, which was make sure you do it on your race bike. A lot of people are a little bit daunted by the TT bike on race day because they haven't been through the conditioning that's needed to hold that position. So that's another element. Please go on your race bike, even if it's not as comfortable as your road bike. That's the reality. And if that daunts you to the point of stopping you going to do that long ride, guess what? The best bike for you on the day is not going to be that TT bike. It's going to be a road bike. So I think there are quite a few points in there that, to the veteran athlete might be thinking, hey, I've heard all this before 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That's okay. If you guys know that, your system and your plan to get to race day, that's okay. But we've had a lot of emails, a lot of comments from people basically shrugging their shoulders saying, I've been preparing for this event for 3 months and it's my first Ironman and I didn't make the cutoff. What was I doing wrong? These are some of the themes that keep coming up year after year. So they may sound simple, but if you tick these little things off, the likelihood is you're going to make it to that magic red carpet.
Yeah, 100%. So the last point on our proper preparation idea is getting athletes in that mindset a year before, 6 months before, of having a structured training plan to follow and having a nutrition plan to follow on race day and practicing those two together. So they end up being second nature to you. And I know a lot of the athletes we work with are constantly talking about, how many grams of carbs I took in on this ride. I'm going to see if I can extend it by 5 grams an hour or 10 grams an hour. They then have a really good feel for what their body can absorb during training on a hot day, during training on a wet day. And it sounds like we're in the weeds of the details here, but really the Ironman is an energy limited sport before it's a fitness limited sport. So it's as important to know about your intake of carbohydrate, fluid and electrolytes as it is the training itself. So make sure that you've practiced that in training, then you know what you're doing come race day. And again, some of the challenges we have in the run up to these races is when people drop us an email and say, I've just heard your podcast about nutrition. I'm preparing for a race next weekend. How much should I take of X, Y, and Z? At that point, we can give people some guidelines and some help for sure. But if you haven't been practicing this or you've just been eating whatever as you've been training, you don't have a plan that you can adapt at that point. And that makes the analysis afterwards much, much more difficult. Right. So the second talking point we're going to come on to is actually discussing effective nutrition and hydration. And again, it's an interesting point, the number of people who we hear from who just have no idea about this at all. So what we like to say is we'll give you some guidelines to start from as a baseline, and then you can work backwards from these. You can then go and try it in training, and you can adapt it. And often people find that these numbers are trainable in terms of how much fluid you can absorb and how many calories you can absorb. But you train from a beginning point. You don't try and start at the very top end. So firstly, be careful with anyone's YouTube video that you're watching, any pro triathletes who are talking about either their fluid intake or their carb intake. They're likely to be outliers at the very least, and in some cases, just really freakish humans who can absorb tons of. I saw a thing about Fenella Langridge at Roth taking 100 grams of carbs an hour, I think, which is an astonishing amount of carbohydrate, especially given how tiny she is. So I would hate for a comparable sized female to look at that and go, oh, well, Fenella looks like me. I'll try 90 grams or 100 grams an hour. That's a massive amount that most massive guys couldn't absorb, to be perfectly frank with you. So our baseline numbers here are look for between 600 to 1,000 milliliters of fluid per hour, more if you're bigger and more if you are racing in hot conditions. 1,000 milligrams of sodium per liter in order to keep the sodium concentration right, and about 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight. So a 60 kilo athlete is going to have 60 grams of carbs per hour. Practice all of this in training. And if you get through a long ride on 60 grams of carbs, you can go to 65, you can go to 70. And eventually you're going to get to the point where you think, well, I just can't eat anymore on a ride. And that's when, I think you've reached your kind of top limit and you can back it off a little bit from there. I don't think you want to be, or I'm sure you don't want to be, trying to consume your most fluid ever, your highest electrolytes ever, and your highest calories ever on race day. You want to be operating below what you've successfully done in training.
And that goes for caffeine as well, which is a big reason why a lot of people DNF. They don't train with caffeine, or not to the extent that they are on race day. And then on race day, they feel like their energy is dwindling at hour 5 or 6, for example. And they're thinking, oh, I'll just have a caffeine gel. And then 45 minutes later, oh, my energy's disappearing. I'll go for another caffeine gel. 7 hours in, there's 7 caffeine gels in, and they're the people queuing for the Portaloos. And that usually leads to a DNF. So if you are going to be a caffeine user, for example, please train with caffeine. I think
accept there's a number of those you can have in a race. They're like pressing the nitrous button in the Fast and the Furious movie, aren't they? You've got, I don't know, I would say 2 or maybe 3 caffeinated gels in you in a day. Maybe 2 is a safe number. What did you used to take when you were racing?
Well, this is an interesting point, and I want to reiterate what I'm about to say is not what I want the athletes to do. It's just what I do on an individual basis, what I've been doing for years. So if I think back to my first Ironman experience, I averaged probably between 40 grams and 50 grams of carbs per hour. And at the time, and still now, I'm around 60 kilograms in weight. So I was slightly under. And the point there was that I tried to go a little bit higher in training, and it made me feel incredibly bloated. And especially on the run, I really, really struggled. So I kind of just came to the conclusion of, this is what my body is allowing me to not only consume, but actually absorb and process at my race intensity. And now if we go 7 years down the line and where I am now, I'm doing similar events in terms of duration. I can do 7, 8, 9 hour events, but mostly on the bike. And I average over 100 grams per hour of carbs. So to me, that is proof that it can be trained. It can be something that is, yes, partly genetic, but it can be adapted. But it takes time. It's taken me 7 or 8 years to get to the point where I've got full confidence in my body, and I know how much caffeine, I know how much liquid, I know how much sodium, magnesium, potassium. And it takes so much time, and it's taken me, a whole process where after each long ride, each training ride, I write down what I intended on taking versus what I did actually take.
Yeah.
And over time, I've managed to marry those two up. But the majority of the time, I'd say, oh, I want 7 gels on that ride. And in reality, I only had 2 gels and I had to stop at a cafe and ate 2 muffins and a panini. That's the reality of it. And if the athlete's thinking, oh, Chris doesn't really know what he's doing, yes, to a certain degree, but I challenge you as the listener to, in your next long ride that's 3 hours or longer, write down in Training Peaks or whatever system you use on a piece of paper and write down your optimal consumption in terms of liquid, sodium, and also in carbs, and the timing of that. So per hour, this is what I'd expect to have in the conditions that I'm about to ride in. As soon as you get through the door, write down exactly what you had, and the likelihood is it's going to be massively different. And a good racer are the ones that are actually able to marry those two up because they know what they can consume in terms of how it feels on the belly and whether you have that bloated feeling. But also they've got full trust in the fuel that they're putting in and at the right times. And they're the athletes that are running in the last 10K of the marathon. They're the ones because they've practiced it and they understand. And, you see all these athletes at the second aid station on the run who are stuffing their faces with crisps, Haribo, all that stuff. That's okay if that's what they've trained on. But my guess is that they haven't gone out with packets of crisps and Haribo. They've been training on, totally different brands. So
Yeah.
That's what I'd love to see athletes doing, is creating a plan that's tried and tested over months and months and months over different conditions. And actually, when you test it in terms of, I know that this is the amount of grams of carbs per hour, but it's been stress tested in different scenarios and you have full confidence in that plan and you know how to flex it. So, long answer to your question, which was, what did I go through? Well, I mean, now I'm looking at roughly 100 grams of carbs per hour, and I'm looking to get as much sodium and liquid in as possible. And I'm lucky enough to have not had massive gastric issues or stomach problems. But I caveat it by saying that the majority of my races now, I'm not running off the bike. And if I did try and do my current plan in an Ironman, for example, I think I'd really struggle. So again, you have to think of the kind of, not just duration, but the kind of endurance event you're doing. So if you are running off the bike, you're going to have to practice a fueling strategy that allows you to run comfortably off the bike and not just consume as much as you can if it was a bike ride.
Yeah. I think that the key takeaway there is people need to start with a plan, with a baseline, and see how it works for them, and then try and adapt it and see if they can take more or if they need to take less, and see if they can train it over time. But it's the having a plan, the writing down what you thought you were going to do, and then writing down what you actually did afterwards is a really good test of, did I do what I thought I was going to do? Because often when you review a race with an athlete, in recent years, it's interesting, as we've spent more time with our athletes doing race preparation documents, they know what they were meant to take, and then they can contrast what they did take, and we can go, right, okay, so did you need more, whatever, fluid, sodium? If you're starting from a position of not really knowing what you've taken at all, then it's a more difficult challenge. So have that plan, stick to it.
I could show you some pretty funny ones, Rob, where, I'd go out on a really, really long ride, 6 hours or so, and I'd calculated exactly what I planned to take, 7 energy bars and 7 gels, for example. And the reality is I've come back with 6 of the bars, 6 of the gels, and I've, got a packet of the wrapper for a Magnum ice cream in the back pocket and a receipt for an egg baguette. It's totally different to what I planned to take. But the wheels were falling off and I didn't know how to adapt my plan, and it was hotter than I thought, and I was right on the limit of bonking. And that's a process that an athlete has to go through. But if you just ignore the fact that what you went through was totally different to what you planned, then the likelihood is that on Ironman race day, for example, things could unravel very quickly if they're not exactly as you hope they are. So yeah, I really encourage you to go through that testing process.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, our next talking point then is around pacing strategy for all of the 3 legs. And this again is often a surprise to some new athletes, the idea that you can choose how hard you swim, you bike, and you run, and you have an idea of how hard you swim, you bike, and you run. So In terms of swimming, biking, and running, we'll talk about paces relative to some benchmarks. So for swims, what we tend to say for our athletes is, firstly, if we just look at the easy level of understanding, your swim should feel really easy. It shouldn't feel hard at any point. It's setting you up for a bike ride. We go back to the old analogy. You're swimming the Bristol Channel to ride your bike from Bristol to London before you start the London Marathon. So the swim should feel really easy. If you feel as though you're going flat out at any point, you need to slow down and you need to back yourself up, because that is what's going to decide how much of your carbohydrate stores you burn through in the first hour. In terms of CSS pace, dead simple. We're going to say between CSS +4 and CSS +8 seconds per 100. So if your CSS pace is 2 minutes, you should be swimming your Ironman at between 2:04 and 2:08. Probably towards the slower end of that is a really good gauge for people as to what an easy swim is going to feel like. And the reason I bring this up is it's so people can go back to the pool and they can try and swim at CSS +8 and find out what it feels like. Because a lot of swimmers' experience in a club swim is they just swim as hard as they can for an hour to stay in the line of swimmers that they're with. And they've really got no idea about how to choose their pace. So you'll need to go to the pool on your own. You'll need to swim in a lane relatively clear of other people and learn what that pace feels like. So you can learn I think almost the sensation of the swim is more important than the speed of the swim. So you can get into that either breathing bilaterally every 3 or breathing unilaterally, but every 4 strokes. That's a real good marker that you're not working too hard for the swim for Ironman, I think.
That's where the swim's a bit of an outlier in the sport that we're in. We've got no data in terms of, as you're swimming on race day, you can't really be looking, and you shouldn't really be looking at your watch. Whereas on the bike, we've got all the gadgets. On the run, we've got all the gadgets. So this one is, kind of going back to basics, and you have to go on feel. And the only way that you're going to get feel is by going through that process numerous hours. It's also a sport that requires a lot of technique and efficiency versus racing. And if you are swimming that, call it 2:04 or 2:08, it might feel like an absolute joke in the pool. You're thinking, this is so slow. I should definitely be swimming faster than this. But the reality is, it's an Ironman, and there's no such thing as a good swim and a poor bike. And same again with the bike. There's no such thing as a good bike and a poor run. Anything that feels terrible at the time, you've got to rewind the clock 2 hours ahead.
Yeah.
And what did you do then? The likelihood is you spiked your heart rate, you went too hard, and it might have felt okay at the time, but you've got to always be looking 2 or 3 hours ahead. So yeah, the swim is one where I think people get excited. We're in the open water. You've got 1,000 other people around you and you're chasing feet, which is okay to a certain degree, but you should always be swimming basically what feels like warm-up pace. And it is
100%. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly the way to think about it. As long as you know you're going to beat the cutoff, and I hope that you do know you're going to beat the cutoff because it's race day. If you got to the point where you're really unsure whether you're going to meet the cutoff on race day, maybe again, it's time to review whether to do this or defer to another year. I think that's the way to think about it. The swim should feel really easy and it should set you up for a great bike ride. And if you're not quite at that level yet, you can come back another year. There's nothing lost. You've set your stall out to try this, but there's nothing worse than seeing those few athletes who completely miss the cutoff, but they get there in, 2:20, 2:21, or even 2:18 and are completely ruined. Because that's a massive swim, isn't it? Swimming for 2 hours 20 is a long, long time. I've never swum for that long, I don't think.
No, I plan on not. Yeah.
Onto the bike then. In terms of bike intensity and how it feels, again, we'll make this simple for people. It should feel easy. It should feel easy for the first 2 hours. It should feel moderate for the next 2 hours. And the difficulties that should come not because you're pushing hard, but because it's hard to be out there for that length of time. You should almost never be out of breath on the bike on an Ironman. Even if it's really hilly, you should be trying your best to get up the hills with as least energy expenditure as possible. So in terms of heart rate zones, ride that in heart rate zone 2. In terms of power, you're going to be somewhere for most people in the 60 to 70% of FTP range as an average. But you're going to have to do what you have to do to meet the bike cutoff. that's where the trade-off of the two comes. For the people who are chasing this DNF area, at the Bolton example, it's I think 2 hours 20 plus 10 minutes in transition plus 8 hours on the bike gives you like a 10:30 cutoff to get into T2 by. If that's you, you need to have a really clear idea of your pacing strategy that's going to get you there comfortably. Aim for 10 minutes within the cutoff, or 20 minutes or 30 minutes within the cutoff, to know that you're going to get there comfortably.
And I don't know what your opinion is on this, Rob, but when we're using metrics to help us beat the cutoff, on the bike, you've mentioned heart rate, you've also mentioned power. Would you agree that we would find it beneficial for athletes to be using normalized power as the main metric when riding outdoors on the course, as opposed to average power? So just to be clear to athletes that are listening, the difference is normalized power is a metric that has a built-in algorithm that takes into considerations fluctuations in power. So when we're outdoors, you've got lots of external factors. You've got inclines, you've got hills, popping in and out of the saddle, and all these spikes in power do have a cost in terms of physiological output, whereas average power is literally just a round number. So I've seen a lot with the athletes that I've seen their data, and I asked them, okay, you blew up on the run, let's have a look at your targets and your caps that you were using on race day. And they fell into the trap of saying, oh, I was aiming for 200 average watts, let's say, for example. And that's very different to 200 normalized power watts. So I would really encourage athletes to, when you're outdoors, train with normalized power on your computer screen and understand how that feels versus average power. And there'll always be a little bit of a difference, call it 10% or so. And that's okay, but don't go chasing that average power number, which is going to be a little bit harder to go and chase. So the way to have your normalized power achieved is by riding as smooth as possible. So the smoothest cadence possible. So when you have a hill, don't be looking to power up that hill as hard as possible. Look to have that average cadence very similar to the cadence that you have on the flats. Have your heart rate nice and smooth and controlled. And I'm talking in the way that I think you should be riding, just very slow, very nice and controlled. And we see it when I go and spectate events, that people see a hill, they get excited. Usually there's a crowd on the hill and everyone's popping out the saddle, maybe going up and down the gears. And it looks great. It looks great on camera. But what's not so great is 7 hours later when they're stuffing their face with crisps at the aid station again. And that's nothing to do with their run. That's to do with how many times they did those spikes in power. So normalized power is all about being as smooth and as kind of considerate as possible to the physiological cost that you're putting your body through. So that's my main takeaway on this one, is normalized power could be a very, very useful metric for you.
Yeah, I think it's only use normalized power, and the hillier the course is, the more important that normalized number is, because exactly as you said, it's telling you the physiological cost of what you've done on your body rather than a numerical average of what you've done. So absolutely. Run speed. Again, all we're looking for people to do here is to control how fast they run when they're excited and they come out of T2. So for those of you who've used our VDOT system, if you know what your e-pace is, the top end of e-pace, the faster end of the e-pace band, is your best case scenario for 95% of athletes on race day. There's going to be some guys and women at the very top end of their age groups and the top end of the race who are going to be able to go a good bit faster than that. But for most people, and I do genuinely mean 95%, aiming for that e-pace run that you've done hundreds and thousands of times in training, if you can hold yourself back to that at the start of the run, you're setting yourself up for a really strong last 10 miles. And that's really what we want people to have. We want them to be able to run really well in the second half. And really, I'd love it if we saw less and less and less athletes walking the last 10K to the point where everybody got to have a good run at the Ironman.
Remember, this podcast is all about how to avoid the DNF. And what Rob just said is an absolute golden cookie. If you do your first 10K as your slowest 10K, the likelihood is that you're going to reach the cutoff because you're looking after your body. The pace is going to be smooth, consistent. When you get to the second 10K, you'll be able to replicate what you did in the first 10K and so on. Whereas we know that everyone's first 10K is the fastest. People are panicking, people are excited about being off the bike, people are chasing their optimal paces. And these are the people that are DNFing because no one wants to walk the 30 remaining K. And that's fair enough. No one should be doing that, really. If you signed up to an Ironman, you should be in a position where you can back yourself of, essentially running the marathon, and that can be split up as a 9-1 or various different strategies. But if you've looked after your body on swim, bike, and your first 10K of the run, the likelihood is that the cutoff won't be an issue.
100%. All right, Chris, let's talk about dealing with adversity on race day. I think we've got two main points to talk about here. The first one is adverse weather conditions, and the second one is adverse mechanical conditions. And both of these, I think, come down to practicing. It's having a practice in the weather that you could possibly face on race day and practicing to be able to fix any potential mechanicals that might come your way. And we go back to the story of the wind at Ironman UK this year. There were lots of people there who had never ridden in those conditions. I know that personally because people came to talk to me as I was standing in transition and said, I've never been out with my, I've never been out on my TT bike in wind like this before. Am I going to be okay? Or I've never been out on my deep section wheels before in wind like this. It could very well be very windy on race day. So find a way to train and practice in the conditions that you're going to face, even if that consciously means going to the open water venue on a Thursday night when it's tipping it down and it's blowing a gale. Be the person who goes and trains in those conditions.
Isn't it amazing how different an athlete's experience could be when, for example, the little story you just said there, where an athlete came up to you and said, will I be okay in these conditions? You don't know. Likelihood is you don't know this person, you don't know what their history is in the sport, but how different that individual's experience would have been when they came up to you and they said, God, it's windy, it's terrible, but I will be okay, because they know it. But having that insecurity of, I've literally got no idea whether I'm going to be okay, so essentially I'm going to ask a randomer whether I'm going to be okay. That a DNF is on the cards when you're starting your day like that.
Yeah.
So try and minimize that anxiety, minimize the amount of cards that you're turning over that could be something you've never seen before. You want to have a pack of cards, you know all of the options, and to have a solution to all of them. But yeah, it's daunting, especially when you get to Ironman. So much can change, so much can go right and wrong. And I personally think that we are actually in control of a lot more than we think. Even, we mentioned weather, mechanicals, but if we've got 6 to 12 months of preparation, test yourself. Be halfway through, a training ride and play the scenario of, I've got a puncture now. Actually go and change it, even if you don't have a puncture, or you've run out of water. Then what are you going to do? There's so many things that we can actually control. No one wants to go through those kind of boring, hard testing scenarios because we want the perfect ride in the sun. But the likelihood is, especially if you're signing up to a UK event, it's not going to be sun and roses every day. It's going to be hard, real hard.
Yeah. And so here's the challenge then. Look at the historical weather conditions for the race you've done. If you've entered a big European race in the middle of summer, the chances are it is going to be very, very hot. And you've got the choice to heat acclimate for that. We've done a whole episode on heat acclimation. If you've signed up for a race anywhere in the UK, the chances are the weather can be horrific on race day. And so if you've only done Zwift rides on the days it's been windy and rainy, I guarantee you that your race day is not going to be on Zwift. I guarantee that it's not. So maybe you can start applying yourself and thinking, well, I'm just going to do the first hour outdoors in the rain and the wind, and then come back and do 2, 3, 4 more hours on Zwift if I need to. But get out there and experience it. Because if you've never ridden in the rain, I'm even going to say this, you need to go out and do a 6-hour ride when it's horrendous, because how do you know how you're going to dress for race day? I mean, how many stories have we heard from Ironman Wales where I think every other year at Wales, the weather's been really difficult, windy, rainy, and people don't know what to wear because you can't just wear a tri-suit. The time to decide what to wear is not the night before when you're in Tenby and you've turned up and you haven't got your rain jacket with you. It's to have practiced it in February or March when the weather was horrific then, and you know that you've got this set of clothes that will work for you there. So there's that. Practicing changing mechanicals. I mean, other than fixing punctures, there's not a huge amount else you can prepare for come race day other than I suppose knowing how to put a chain back on if it comes off. There's a surprising number of people don't know how to do that. I think the number of people who carry a chain tool with them on race day is pretty minimal, but it's not a big heavy item of kit. It probably weighs 20 grams to carry a chain breaker and a quick link and stick that in your bento box. Or again, that's under our control, isn't it? You've only got to break a chain once in an event to decide to carry a chain breaker with you for the rest of the events that you do.
And how many people that are carrying the chain breakers have ever used one? That's the other. If whatever you've got on you, make sure that you've actually used it before and not just watched the odd video or relying on a kind person that's going to bail you out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. And right then, our final talking point for today is around mindset and mental strength, because anyone who is chasing this line between finishing and not finishing is going to have a significant period of mental anguish in the lead up to this, whether it's the stress and pressure of trying to chase to get inside one of the cutoffs, whether it's constantly fighting the battle in your mind, whether to quit or not. To a certain extent, I think that battle that goes on in your head, whether to quit or not, it'd be really good if we said this on the podcast and got it out loud. Everybody goes through that. Even the people at the very front of the field have to convince themselves. I can even point to a Mark Allen interview that I did years ago, where he was running alongside Dave Scott in 1989, thinking to himself, I think I can beat Dave Scott. And then the next thought was, I don't think I can take another step. I'm going to have to quit. And he swung between that for 6 miles every other step. So everybody goes through this thought that you can stop and you can quit. So prepare for that in training. If you get to go out and do something hard in training and then keep on doing it beyond the point you want to quit, you've put yourself in a great position for race day to practice dealing with that voice that's telling you need to stop.
It's a really personal thing, isn't it, when we get into the mental strategies of what's going to help someone get through the inevitable, challenging, dark moments, let's say, during a long distance event. And I'm not going to pretend that I've got the answer for everyone, and I certainly don't think I do, but I do think that knowing that it's kind of inevitable, when you're looking at 8 hours and longer, for example, it's impossible for us to be on this high line of everything's brilliant, body's feeling fine, and the mind is in total sync with the body, because the reality is you're going to have those moments of absolute self-doubt. Is this even worth it? What's the point? I could just stop now. But the point is, that's why you signed up. Personally, that's what I think. 6 months ago, 12 months ago, you saw this event online. You probably had a few looks at the videos and images, and you thought, oh my God, I think I could maybe do that one day. And then you signed up, and here you are, and you're now scared. And you're going to face the reality of, oh my God, I've got another 20K of a marathon to go. I can't feel my legs and I can't control my mind. Now what do I do? If you get excited by that, you'll be absolutely fine. And this is what I do personally. I know that it's going to happen at some point during these events. I know it. I've always had it and I always will. But when I get there, I get really excited. It's like, this is what I paid for. This is what I trained for. It's for this moment of uncertainty, of the voices in my head saying, stop, have a sit down by the road. And if it comes to it, I'll happily have a sit down by the road. And I've done that many times. But the feeling of then getting back up, knowing that, okay, my original goal of hitting sub whatever time it was has now gone. Now what do I do? Well, the only option is I'm going to get myself to the finish line. I don't care if it's dark. I don't care if I come last place. But the knowledge and the kind of internal belief that it takes to get to that finish line it's well worth the entry fee and the 6 months of real hard grind. So whether you're coming first in your age group or whether you're fighting for that cutoff, doesn't really matter, because you're going to go through that similar experience of you're about to do the impossible. Because your body and your mind has told you, well done, but this is game over and you're not at the finish line. But you've got to find that inner something, and I don't know what it is. I'm sure psychologists listening might be able to send us a few messages on research of or what they believe that thing that gets us off the curb is. But if you can get off the curb and get to that finish line, it will be the best experience of your life. Who cares about the time? Who cares about the watts or the pace? just get yourself to that finish line.
Brilliant. That's a great place to leave it, man.
Yeah, no more DNFs.
No more DNFs. So if you're listening and you have DNF'd, I hope there's some ideas here for you that will help you out. Go and prepare for next time. Get yourself ready for the battle for next time, and into a place, into a mindset where you can go and conquer that Ironman next time. Yeah, good stuff, Chris.
Yeah, good luck to all the athletes listening. Good luck. It's race season, and you can do it. You can do it. Just prepare yourself.
And if you have DNF'd in this race, there's plenty of time left this season. There's plenty of time to get yourself into a slightly better shape and go back and make the difference for the next one. We hope that you do. All right, guys, we'll wrap this episode up here. Here are some discount codes and deals for you. Over at precisionfuelandhydration.com, you can use the code OA23 for 15% off your first order. And over at teamoxygenetic.com, I think we've got the most comprehensive endurance sports coaching program for busy age groupers, whether it's triathlon, ultra running, duathlon, aqua bike, any combination of swim, bike and run, basically, you name it. You can book a call with us to see how you could best use your training time and how we can help get you into awesome shape. There's a link in the show notes. Go straight through to our calendars and we can see if you'd be a good fit for joining our team. So remember, there's links in the show notes on YouTube and podcast. You can just click on those. You don't have to remember them. And until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby and he's Chris Palfreyman, and you've been listening to the Oxygen Addict podcast.